Ready to dive into some 90s nostalgia. Today, we're tackling Kurt Cobain and Nirvana, trying to understand why they still matter, why their music still packs such a punch.
Yeah, it's a big one. To really get it, we gotta rewind back to the early 90s.
Set the stage for us. What was the world like back then?
Picture this, 1991, the Berlin Wall's down, but that end of history vibe, a little off, like something's brewing.
A tension in the air.
Oh, yeah.
And musically.
Hairspray.
Yeah.
Synthesizers. It was all a bit much, honestly.
And then, boom. Smells like Teen Spirit. Like a punch to the gut. I remember hearing it for the first time. Blew me away.
Didn't just blow you away, it blew up the world. Nevermind, the album became this cultural phenomenon.
More than just an album, really. A statement.
Absolutely. By Christmas of 91, it was selling over 400,000 copies a week. People were hungry for something different.
And Nirvana delivered. We hear authenticity thrown around a lot these days, but with them, it wasn't some calculated image, it was real.
Totally. Their sound was raw, Cobain's lyrics were raw. It was the opposite of that polished pop scene.
No pretense, just pure feeling, and that resonated.
Big time. And it's interesting because Nirvana came up in a time when image was everything in music.
Right. Bigger-than-life personas were all the rage.
Exactly. But Cobain's lyrics, they were different. Lithium, poly, something in the way. These weren't just songs. They were like these glimpses into a very specific kind of alienation.
A feeling of being lost, unheard. That's something so many people connect with.
Exactly. And he wasn't shying away from those darker emotions.
Which brings us to that label, the voice of a generation. Overused, maybe, but with Cobain, kind of fit, didn't it?
Absolutely. The timing was part of it, for sure. Yeah. But he captured something really profound about that moment in time, about what it felt like to be young and disillusioned after the Cold War.
Adrift in a world that didn't make sense.
Exactly. And it wasn't just what he was saying, but how he said it. That vulnerability got revolutionary for a rock star back then.
To lay himself bare like that, talk about his struggles with depression, addiction.
Think about other icons of the time. Axl Rose, Michael Jackson, untouchable.
Larger than life.
Cobain, he was the opposite. He'd get up on stage looking like he'd been through hell and back and just be real, I'm hurting too.
That honesty created this instant connection with the audience.
It was powerful. They weren't just fans. They felt like they were part of something.
Witnesses to something real.
Exactly. And his music, yeah, it's angry, it's loud, but there's this undercurrent of empathy, I think.
This vulnerability that pulls you in. You could sense the pain, but you also got the sense that he was searching for something more.
And that's where his artistry really comes through. He could write these incredibly catchy hooks, these arena-ready anthems.
Songs you could scream along to.
But then the lyrics hit you with this wave of despair, of longing. It was this amazing contrast.
Come As You Are is a perfect example. It's got that classic grunge sound, but lyrically, it's complex, thought-provoking.
Right. You can mosh to it, but you can also sit with it and really let those words sink in.
Yeah. And that's what made him so relatable, He wasn't afraid to be a work in progress, to be human.
And speaking of human, wasn't there a story about Cobain wanting to name their third album I Hate Myself and I Want to Die? Oh, yeah. In utero. Dark times.
Talk about wearing your heart on your sleeve.
Right. But thankfully, cooler heads prevailed. Probably for the best, marketing-wise.
Probably. But it's interesting, right? Because we were just talking about how Cobain challenged those rock star expectations.
And then he goes and does it again. Embraces the quiet side of Nirvana.
That MTV Unplugged. Iconic.
Oh, man, that Unplugged. It was like seeing a whole other band.
I remember watching it live.
Yeah.
It was just so raw,
Totally. Stripped down, no distractions, just them and their music.
It felt almost sacred. In a way. Like we were getting this glimpse into something deeply personal.
It's funny you say that because I read that they almost backed out. They were nervous about playing their songs acoustically.
Really? That's wild. It's one of their most celebrated performances.
I know, right? But it just goes to show you their music wasn't about noise. It was about that raw emotion. The instruments were secondary.
And that emotion really comes through, even without all the distortion.
Absolutely. Haunting melodies, those gut-wrenching lyrics and Cobain's voice. Just pure feeling.
Especially in that Lead Belly cover, Where Did You Sleep Last Night?
Oh, man, chills.
Yeah.
Every time.
Gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. But speaking of influences, I know he loved punk rock, but I'm always fascinated by those less obvious inspirations, What were some of the things that shaped his sound?
Well, he was a huge Beatles fan, of course,
Yeah.
but he also loved bands like the Vaselines, Daniel Johnston, even ABBA.
ABBA. Now that's a curveball.
Right, but it makes sense. His music had this pop sensibility, even when it was loud and angry. He just understood what made a good song, you know?
Genre bending. Taking inspiration from everywhere and anywhere.
Exactly. And speaking of unexpected, we have to circle back to that Smells Like Teen Spirit story. Deodorant graffiti.
Amazing, isn't it? Such
Yeah.
a random detail to become so iconic.
It's like he took this throwaway phrase about teenage hygiene and turned it into an anthem for a generation.
And the music just fit perfectly. That opening guitar riff, the way the song builds, it's pure angst and energy.
And the music video, too.
Oh man, don't even get me started on the music video.
Yeah.
Chaotic high school pep rally gone wrong.
It was perfect, like a visual representation of everything Nirvana represented: rebellion, alienation, a little bit of absurdity.
It's no wonder MTV played it on repeat.
Right. But, you know, we've talked a lot about his music, but he was also a really talented visual artist.
Yeah, I'd heard about that. Made sense though, right?
Okay.
His lyrics are so visual, so evocative, it's like he painted pictures with words.
Totally. And his actual art. Equally fascinating.
So what kind of stuff did he create?
Well, he was drawn to the grotesque, the surreal, lots of dark humor. Think anatomical drawings mixed with cartoon characters and pop culture imagery.
Wow, so not exactly something you'd hang in your living room.
Probably not. But it gives you this whole other lens through which to view his creativity, you know? His art was, in a lot of ways, very similar to his music.
In what way?
It was a way for him to process his inner world, his anxieties, all the darkness he was wrestling with. It might not be as accessible as his music, but it's just as powerful in its own way.
It's like we're seeing inside his head, right? All that intensity that came out in the music, it's there in the art too.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, just like he challenged all those rock and roll norms with his music, he did the same thing in the art world. He wasn't interested in making pretty pictures. He wanted to dig into those raw, uncomfortable emotions. It wasn't about pleasing people. It was about expressing something real.
And that fearlessness, that willingness to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
authentic, it's a huge part of why he still connects with people today.
Yeah.
Like he gave people permission to just be themselves.
Totally. He was the opposite of that whole plastic, fake it till you make it culture. And it wasn't just the music and art either. Remember how he kind of accidentally sparked a fashion trend?
Ripped jeans, oversized sweaters. That's Kurt Cobain 101.
It's crazy, right? But it was like he was saying, you don't have to buy into some manufactured idea of cool. You can find beauty in anything.
It's funny how fashion reflects what's happening in music and culture, isn't it? Grunge was all about stripping away the excess of the 80s, getting back to something real.
Totally. It was about being comfortable with who you are, even if who you are is kind of messy.
Exactly. And that message, it really resonated, didn't it? Especially for young people trying to figure out their place in the world.
For sure. But, you know, we've talked a lot about his legacy, the impact he had. But we can't ignore the tragedy of it all. His suicide in '94, it really shook people up.
It did. And it reminds us that behind the fame, the talent, there can be a lot of pain, struggles we don't see.
Absolutely. It's a heavy reminder that we all need to take care of each other and to take care of ourselves.
And talk about mental health, something that's so important.
Definitely. And, you know, the fact that he was open about his own struggles, that meant a lot to people.
It did. Made it okay to not be okay, which is a message we still need today. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Kurt Cobain, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
That's a good question. I think it's important to remember that his story is both a warning and an inspiration. You know, it reminds us that it's okay to be vulnerable, to not fit in. But it also reminds us that even when things are dark, there's always hope.
Beautifully put. And even though he's been gone for almost 30 years, his music, his art, his message, it still resonates. He was a voice for the outsiders, the misfits, and in a world that tries to put us all in these neat little boxes, that's powerful.
It really is. He taught us that it's okay to be different, to be ourselves, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just be real, even if it's messy, even if it hurts.
So well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. Crank up some Nirvana, channel your inner grunge kid, and never be afraid to let your freak flag fly. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring and keep the music loud.